It is dawn in the valley of the Eurotas, and you are 7 years old. You have not been told what is about to happen, but you can feel it in the way your mother's hands keep finding excuses to touch your head, your shoulder, your cheek, as if she is memorizing the shape of you. Outside the door, boots are scraping the stone. Your father is already standing in the yard, arms crossed, face unreadable. When the men come in, they do not ask your name. They do not ask if you want to go. They lift you, carry you out past the fig trees, and set you down in the dirt with 100 other boys who are screaming the same way you are. Your mother stands in the doorway. She does not run after you. That is the first thing she has to teach you. And she is teaching it with her whole body. If you were born in Athens, you would still be nursing at your mother's breast at 7, learning to read in your grandfather's lap, memorizing the names of sea gods on the beach. If you were born in Rome, you would be running through the streets in a little toga, chasing dogs, stealing figs. But you were born in Sparta, and the law of the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus says, in Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus, chapter 16, that once a boy reaches 7 years old, he is taken by the state, enrolled in a troop, and made to sleep, eat, train, and obey inside the machine that will decide if he lives or dies. The state does not ask the mother. The state does not send a letter. The state sends men. So why did the Spartans do it? Why tear a 7-year-old from his mother's arms? On purpose, by law, generation after generation for nearly 5 centuries. And why do the answers that survive in the ancient sources feel less like education and more like a slow, systematic act of psychological warfare on a child's soul? Stay with me, because the real reason is not what you think. And the deeper you dig, the more the whole system starts to look like the answer to one terrifying arithmetic problem the Spartans could never escape. The first thing you have to understand is that the Agoge, the famous Spartan training system, was not a school. It was a survival filter. Plutarch tells us the boys were divided into troops, agoli, under the command of an older boy, and the whole operation was supervised by a state official called the paidonamos, the boy herder, a man whose entire job description was inspection and punishment. Xenophon, the Athenian soldier who actually lived among the Spartans and wrote the constitution of the Spartans, adds the detail most textbooks skip. The paidonamos had the legal authority to beat any boy for any fault, severely in public with witnesses. And above the paidonamos stood an army of whip-bearers, and above them the irons, the 20-year-olds, who drilled the boys in the cruelties of command. The point was never knowledge. Nobody in the Agoge taught reading as a priority. The point was obedience, conditioned so deeply that a man would obey before he thought, because thinking in the split second of a battle gets you killed. So stage 1 of the answer is brutal and simple. They took the boys at 7 because by 7 a child's nervous system is ready to be rewired. 7 is old enough to understand fear. 7 is old enough to be shaped by it. The Agoge was Sparta's way of turning a child into a reflex before any competing loyalty. A mother, a soft bed, a private thought could take root. But the second layer is where it stops being about the boys and starts being about the terror underneath the whole city. Because the Agoge was not built to make soldiers, it was built to make masters. And masters in Sparta were outnumbered. Here is the number that explains everything. At the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE, Herodotus, the father of history, gives us the roster. 5,000 Spartan citizens took the field, and marching with them, 7 enslaved helots for every single one. 35,000 helots, hauling gear, carrying supplies, watching, always watching. The helots were the native Greeks of Laconia and Messenia, conquered, enslaved to the land, and they outnumbered their masters by a ratio the Spartans themselves never forgot. Aristotle would later call the helot problem the constant source of anxiety for the Spartan state, and the historian Thucydides, in the quietest, most chilling line he ever wrote, says the Spartans spent most of their energy simply on taking precautions against them. Now you understand the task. A city of perhaps 8,000 or 9,000 full citizens, at its peak, surrounded by a sea of resentful, armed and able enslaved people who remembered being free. The Agoge was not produced by love of discipline. It was produced by demographics. Every boy taken from his mother at 7 was being pulled out of the civilian world and inserted into the security apparatus of a police state that was terrified of its own population. The nightly brutality, the starvation, the beatings, they were rehearsals. The enemy they were training against was in the fields outside the city walls, and there were 7 of them for every one of you. The third stage is the one that makes people uncomfortable. and it is the part the Spartans institutionalized most deliberately. The boys were not just hardened, they were made cruel on purpose, because cruelty was a job requirement. Plutarch, in Lycurgus chapter 28, describes the Krypteia, the hidden ones. Every year, the most promising young men of the Agoge were sent out at night, barefoot, with nothing but knives, into the countryside. Their orders were simple: hunt helots, kill the strongest, the most suspicious, the ones who might organize a revolt. The ancient sources say the Krypteia murdered helots in the fields at night and disappeared before dawn. Some modern scholars argue the Krypteia was mostly a rite of passage, a graduation ritual, but the ancient writers, Aristotle among them, saw it plainly. This was state terror, and it was run by teenagers who had been taken from their mothers at 7 precisely, so that by 18 a human life meant nothing to them. And here is the horror that nobody puts in the movie versions. The terror went home with them. It was not just the helots who suffered. The Agoge boys were humiliated systematically, forced to steal food and beaten when caught, forced to compete in ritual whippings at the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia on the banks of the Eurotas, where, as Pausanias records, boys endured the diamastigosis, the flogging contest, until blood pooled at their feet and the hardest ones died rather than cry out. The sanctuary of Artemis Orthia, excavated by the British School at Athens between 1906 and 1910, produced a vast hoard of votive lead figurines and the bones of sacrifices, layer after layer of evidence that this cult of sanctioned pain was ancient, original, and central to Spartan identity. You were not taught to endure pain. You were taught to love it, or at least to treat it as the normal texture of existence. So why 7? Why not 10? Why not 12? Because at 7, the brain is still plastic enough to accept pain as normal, and the heart is still young enough to let the state replace the mother. And the fourth layer of the answer is the one most people have never heard, because it is too sad for the myth. The Spartans did not take the boys from their mothers because they hated mothers. They took them because they had designed an entire society on the assumption that a mother's love would destroy the state. In Athens, the mother built the man. In Sparta, the mother was the enemy of the state's project, and so the state made her complicit. Look at the women the sources preserve. Plutarch's Sayings of Spartan Women hands down the most famous line in all of Spartan history. A mother hands her son his shield and says, either this or upon this, come back with it or come back dead on top of it. Another mother, told that her son died at his post, says she gave birth to him so that he would die for Sparta, and that is the only outcome she asks for. And another one, the cruelest of them all, kills her own son with a roof tile because he came home alive and disgraced. Whatever you think of these stories, they tell you the same thing. The system worked, and it worked because it did not stop at the child. It colonized the mother. She was the one who sent him back. She was the state's first checkpoint. The men took the boy at 7, but the mother had been taught to give him away years earlier, at the moment she first picked him up. And then comes the part where modern experts start to disagree, and this is where the story gets genuinely strange. Some scholars, like the historian Mark Golden, point out that our picture of the Agoge comes overwhelmingly from outsiders. Xenophon, Plutarch, Athenians and Romans, writing about a place they found as fascinating and alien as we do. The Spartans themselves, famously secretive, left almost nothing. No Spartan ever wrote a history of his own upbringing, so how much of the brutal curriculum is real? And how much is the ancient equivalent of clickbait, a moralizing horror story that Athenians told about their rivals to make their own softer system look civilized? The ancient sources explicitly admit some of it is propaganda. Xenophon himself concedes that in his own day the Spartans had stopped obeying the laws of Lycurgus, that the Agoge he praised was already a memory. Other historians go further and argue the Krypteia was not a standing institution at all, but a rare, legendary purge, remembered because it was exceptional. But here is the thing the skeptics cannot explain away. The demography. Whatever exactly happened inside the Agoge, the system that took boys at 7 produced, for centuries, the only standing professional military force in the Greek world, and it produced soldiers who outperformed every citizen militia they met. The system also produced the city's collapse. Because there is a final, terrible irony in taking children at 7. The Agoge saved Sparta from the Helots, and the Agoge destroyed the Spartans. Boys raised in packs, without fathers, without mothers, without private property, without private affection, make terrible fathers themselves. Aristotle notes that the Spartan system produced courage, but at the cost of everything that made life worth defending. By the 4th century BCE, the number of full Spartan citizens had collapsed from roughly 8 or 9,000 to around 1,000, and the Spartans had to import mercenaries to fight their own wars. The machine that took boys at 7 produced a perfect soldier, and the perfect soldier was a man with no reason to make more of himself. So why did the Spartan boys get taken from their mothers at age 7? Because Sparta was not a country with an army. It was an army with a country. The child at 7 was not leaving his mother. He was reporting for duty. The mother was not losing a son. She was delivering a weapon, and the state in return gave her a guarantee no other Greek city offered. Her son would either come back holding his shield or come back riding on it, and either way, he would have been hers for exactly as long as the state allowed. Look at your own childhood for a second. Your mother packed your lunch. She kissed your forehead. She stayed up with you when you were sick. In a city where mothers are allowed to love their sons, you can become anything. In Sparta, the state decided that a mother's love was a vulnerability, a crack in the armor, a mutiny waiting to happen. So they closed the crack with a law. 7 years old, the age of the first real memory, the age at which the state decided your loyalty was worth more than your mother's tears. Hold that thought, because next week we are going to look at what actually happened to the boys who survived the Agoge, the ones who graduated into the Krypteia, and the one night every year when the young men of Sparta were sent out into the dark with knives, and no one was allowed to ask what they did. Most people have never even heard the name of that ritual. Subscribe, and you will be one of the few who knows what it was. And before you go, drop a comment. If you had been born in Sparta, do you think you would have survived the Agoge? Be honest. The most honest answers end up in the next script. Hit subscribe. We are just getting started.